Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Outer Sounds. We are here with composer and violinist of the Jack Quartet, Christopher Otto. His new LP, Ragsma, on the Gray Fade label, will be our December selection. And we're happy to have Chris here to chat about his music and whatever else. How you doing, Chris?
I'm doing great. Thanks. Yeah, great to be here.
Yeah, nice to meet you.
Yeah.
I wanted to get started, maybe start with you're most well known for being a member of the Jack Quartet, who has, been a champion of new music and has recorded and performed all over the place and, has had pieces commissioned, for and all that kind of stuff. How did the Jack Quartet form, and how did it sort of come about, and what's sort of the what's kind of the vision of the quartet, and how do you see yourselves kind of situated in the musical world?
Yeah. Jack Quartet kind of started when I was a student at Eastman School of Music in Rochester.
Okay.
And I was a composition major, but I played violin a lot as well, and played a lot of our fellow student composers, our friends' music, both informally and through ensembles. Like there's a student-run new music ensemble called OSEA that's still going. So there's kind of a tradition there at Eastman to get, just playing new music, both like the literature and like just fresh off the page stuff. And as I was composing myself, I was naturally gravitated toward that. And I gravitated toward, all kinds of music and just trying to open myself to as many different kinds of ways of thinking as possible and seeing what was interested. So my interest changed over time. But John Pickford Richards, the violist who's still in Jack, and I, and the original violinist and cellist Ari Streisfeld and Kevin McFarland. Those were the four of us, the initials JACK. And we started, the first really thing that we did together was Lachenmann's third quartet, which is called Grado.
Mm-hmm.
And Grado is an acronym actually of the members of the Arditi quartets, named at the time Graham, Rohan, Irvin, and Dove. So, and we joked that it would have been called Jack Quartet if it was written for us. But we got to, we had a joke about it, and then just like, okay, we couldn't think of anything better. So we kind of stuck with that. And then, but anyway, we got really amazing work time with Helmut Lachenmann for a few weeks, which was like the most challenging thing we'd ever done up to that point, just reading off of some crazy handwritten manuscript and trying to make parts out of it. And that experience kind of brought us together, and we just shared a passion for new music. And we kind of got known early on more in Europe for doing European kind of stuff like Lachenmann and Ligeti and, Xenakis, Yanis Xenakis. He was a huge inspiration for us. And but we've also done composers from all over the world, lots of American composers, and we try to keep an openness to lots of different strands of musical thought. There's so many different streams of compositional practice, and we can never do everything. So we acknowledge that we're going to be, I think the longer and then, so just to recap, we got, fast forwarding to like 2016 is when we brought on Austin and Jay. And it's been really great. Since then, we've just continued to kind of hone what we're interested in. We try to keep both a broad range of, we play a lot of student pieces at universities, and we also have our own program called Jack Studio, which is now in its third year. And we're trying to create an environment where we can just cultivate work with composers on the most idealistic terms that we can, like as opposed to relying on institutions that are great. We can do work with them, and the composers that can afford to get into those most prestigious places that can afford to pay us.
Right.
In other words, end up not getting served by quartets like us. So that's one part of our mission now, is to really to keep expanding the range of creative voices that we acknowledge. And but at the same time, we're also kind of honing in on what we really, it's always a balancing act, because there's an infinite number of musics out there. We have to choose. We always have to choose, and it's always hard. But I'm excited to really present the music that we're really passionate about.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, you guys have played and recorded a lot of cool music. I think I first heard about you guys through the Xenakis recordings on Mode. Was that?
Yeah,
you did some stuff.
Definitely, that was our first big one.
Yeah, those are cool. And you guys are based in New York, right?
Correct. Yeah. Okay. We've been in New York for the last while. Yeah.
So, you mentioned that you went to Eastman for, composition, and you're a violin player too. How did you get started with music, with playing violin or playing music when you were younger, and sort of what was your sort of like transition to wanting to move to be a composer? You kind of play a dual role as a performer and composer. A lot of people, I went to grad school for composition because I kind of moved away from wanting to be a performer towards a composer. Didn't really do both, but that's interesting that you inhabit like both of those spaces. So just tell me about that, how you ended up at Eastman, and kind of your background and where you grew up and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so I grew up in Champaign, Illinois, and my parents weren't music. What? You're from where?
I'm from Illinois too. So
what part of Illinois?
Crystal Lake, Illinois, which is like northern northwest suburbs of Chicago. So
yeah. So, in Champaign, there, the University of Illinois was there, and the Quartet Center exposed me to a lot of really amazing art and music from a pretty early age, and also the college. There were some really crazy new music concerts. So I started on piano when I was around 5, and violin when I was like 7 or 8. And as far as I can remember, I started, writing stuff down as well. But I would never play. A lot of it was just like purely visual, writing down notes, not being able to hear it. But I got to play in a John Cage piece called 23 for 23 string players. And I had this amazing experience because I had 2 notes to play over the course of a 23-minute piece, and each one could begin and end within certain time brackets.
Right.
And so a note could be a few seconds long, or it could be 10 minutes long or 15 minutes long. And it was like a totally new. This was when I was maybe 10 or 11. So I'd just been playing violin for a couple of years. And I was like, oh, wow. So just thinking about like, wow, what would happen if I just, first of all, like the tuning of the note, and then like as you hold it, you think about different things and you start listening to all the other notes that are happening. And it creates this sense of infinite possibility every time it's different.
Right.
So we got to perform that. And on the same concert was a concert of Xenakis's Analogique A+B, which is for electronics and 9-string players. So I listened to that one, and it was amazing. It was hilarious to me, and also really intriguing because of the stochastic processes that he was using at Elian Rodrigue.
Pretty crazy.
So I was into
when you were. Oh, I was gonna say that's pretty crazy music to experience when you were like 10 or 11. I
know. And I mean, like it sort of lay dormant for a long time after that, or for a bit, because I had no idea how to engage with it, but. As I was also really interested in math at the same time, I started learning more about the music theory and math and theoretical connections. And I also, a really important person at the U of I that was a former student of Ben Johnston, he showed me kind of the basic lattice of just intonation, which is really applicable to all kinds of things in just traditional harmony, how to tune a major triad and how to see how the major triads could be tuned. And it resolved the paradox that I had noticed, which was tuning a certain note against one open string versus tuning it against another open string. And
Right.
there's a discrepancy with what sounds most resonant. And I didn't know. So finally getting the mathematical tools to get to understand how to deal with that took a while. But as I got into Eastman, I decided I enjoyed playing violin as well, but I wanted to study composition more formally. So I got to work with some really great people, including like Bob Morris, who was, he knew a lot about math. And so I could talk about the theoretical side, everything from Xenakis to Indian ragas. He was like really helpful. And anyway, just to get to your question about the balance between performing and composing, I guess for a lot of time, they were actually kind of separate because I would perform lots and lots of different music, but I rarely would perform my own music. I just wrote it, and I preferred to have other people play it and just be able to listen to it. But I also realized that it was, important for me to work directly with performers, especially as I got into more specific tuning things. I found it's, easiest to just make sure each person understands what they're listening for and listen with them, and then kind of put it together that way. And that, I've tried to integrate the performer side in a bit more because in the past, like my mathematical side has caused me to basically create these structures, which would take me a really long time to execute and write out or realize somehow. And then I would finally hear it. And it just wouldn't sound the way I imagined it at all, of course, because there wasn't really a feedback loop of getting to hear and then revise, So I tried to integrate it more and just like try to root it in my practice as a performer. And that has helped me in the last few years, I think, try to build pieces based on what it is like to learn them. In other words, like in Ragsma specifically, I did it as an exercise to see how would you try to achieve this really impossible task, which is to find this minute interval. But I tried to break it down into as easy a process as possible. So just one player plays one note at a time, and one player is basically forte sustaining, and the new player fades in their note in a simple ratio, which is there's only 4 different ratios it'll be. I don't necessarily want to get into numbers, but there's only 4 possibilities, and it should theoretically work. And you fade in, and then the next person takes over their pitch from that and builds a new ratio off of that. And you chain these ratios together. But yeah, and it's always like, it's always amazing to me how much, even though I try to simplify and build things that are, I think, as doable as possible, there are always more challenges the more that exist, and the challenges that remain are actually more I find gratifying and interesting challenges than just having something that's totally impossible to try to realize.
Yeah, it's interesting because like you're saying, you're trying to create these kind of pure mathematical ratios or harmonies or whatever, which could be executed electronically perfectly. You can just put in the numbers and you've got everything you want. But once you pass it to humans who are playing an instrument, those little slight errors or variations come in, and that colors the music and the piece in a certain way, at which obviously you get the human element and it just, and the timbre of a specific instrument or whatever. But that does definitely makes it, you're kind of like splitting the difference between perfection and like something less than perfection, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I go full idealistic and I just create electronic music, and I Or I did something recently where I just recorded a bunch of tones, like each individual tone, and then built something to kind of create harmonies out of them so I could listen to it quickly, but
Right.
it still has some human element. But that is something I think about with to what degree I want the human element and to what degree there's a platonic ideal of the harmony that I'm interested in. And Ragsma is starting to explore this for me, this idea of fuzziness and like a sort of gray zone. It's not like there's dead on, like in just intonation, usually we think of every ratio as being, you got to be dead on. There's an infinitely small, narrow goal. But I started thinking about what if there's like sort of a little bit more give to it. And in the third quartet part of the Ragsma, it's sort of that role where it's sort of triangulating between the other two quartets and trying to find some common fundamental, but it's going to be approximate. It's not going to be like an exact value. So that, I think, to me, and the way we recorded the third quartet reflected that, because we did it all together versus the other two quartets, we recorded one player at a time.
Yeah. I'm glad we're talking about Ragsma. I wanted to, ask you a few questions about that, but it sounded like you were trying to kind of explore, the pitch ratios, in this piece, and you were able to do that, with overdubbing. What you made it, I think the first side is 3 quartets, right? Kind of overdubbed or on top of each other. And then the second side is just 2 quartets. Was that a way for you to for one to like allow you to kind of like sort of crossfade and blend between different chords, or just make like a thicker, larger kind of sonority, rather than just trying to have it be a single quartet or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like hearing the piece in both versions, basically. Like, so initially I actually started with the 2 quartet version, and I listened to that, and it made me want it, just the process of quartet 1 and 2 by themselves, for me, my brain has to kind of create the narrative or the fundamentals or the I was just noticing the process that my brain made in kind of gathering the notes together into some kind of cohesive whole, and then figuring out how can I sort of make an algorithm to present that in quartet 3. So I imagined this third quartet part as I was listening to the other 2, but I think both are good to listen to. And in some other, I can imagine many different realizations of this piece, like where you, and there's even a third realization that is part of the album too, I think, but only digitally, which is the version where you only hear 1 quartet sometimes. Most of the time it's like quartet 1, and then it'll switch to quartet 2. And that way you can actually hear the skeleton of the structure, and each quartet is very consonant at any given moment, and it's slowly modulating. But it's only when you put the 2 quartets together that we get the beating and stuff. So I wanted to kind of, put your 3D glasses on and kind of see inside the structure. But I like actually presenting, the reason it's side A with all 3 is kind of like, that's the whole thing. Like, you can see the surface and you can see inside of it through subsequent listenings. But they're complementary.
Yeah. A couple other small things about the record. Where does the title come from, and how did you meet up with Joe Bransford and start working with him and his label?
The title came from the name of the interval that it's based on, the Regisma, which is 4375 to 4374. It's 0.4 cents, which is a tiny, tiny imperceptible interval. And so the Ragsma is just like the contraction of that, basically. as far as yeah, I've known Joe for a while. We played in a band called the Cellar and Point for
Okay.
quite a few years. Recorded together, and then yeah, so I've recorded with Joe, and also my friend Chris Bada, who recorded the first two quartet parts with.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, Joe actually heard the premiere of the piece, which was with live quartet and the two pre-recorded quartets, which we did in this really cool resonant space, the Rotunda at Bronx Community College, which is yeah, it's this big dome that has a really long reverb. It was perfect. And yeah, Joe just really liked the piece and like wanted to put it out. So I'm really grateful.
Nice. So you mentioned earlier that your kind of like first exposure to just intonation or alternate tuning systems was like through the student of Ben Johnston or something like that, and then also
his name was Jeff Gibbons was his name, I think.
Right. Yeah. And also just your experience of playing the violin and like tuning the violin. What kind of drew you to, working with just intonation, and also how do you develop your systems? I know that like there are a lot of composers who work in just intonation, and every composer has their own kind of unique or idiosyncratic tuning system that they use, and they say it's better than the other one, and it's like a whole, theoretical, and like, people debate it about which world, So who are your main, kind of like influences or people that you've studied in that world as well?
A big one for me, starting on when I got in college, was Lamont Young. And just like, especially the sense of really breaking things down to a minimal level, like, the well-tuned piano was a really big influence for me. And also the Four Dreams of China. And also, James Tenney was really important for me. And some of his theoretical writings as well. And as well as Ben Johnston. I had more trouble with getting into his music, like just aesthetically.
Right.
But some of the concepts, but then, the more recently, although still like probably over 10 years, 15 years ago, maybe now, when I encountered Mark Sabat and Wolfgang von Schweinitz, and their notation system, the Helmholtz-Ellis, their things, my understanding kind of grew more rapidly. I think just having the notation, that notational facility, and be able to go between ratios, and it made a lot more sense to me than Ben Johnston's notation. But and I think there's more and more people that are kind of adopting it. I don't want to, I mean, and the whole Plain Sound website, I think I always point people toward that for resources to going in deeper. And and even more recently, a huge one for me is Katherine Lam.
She's great. I love her music.
We just recorded her string quartets, and that should be coming out fairly soon.
That's great.
I'm really excited. It's really such a journey, and you can see the influence of Indian music, raga and Drupad and stuff, but it's done totally uniquely to her. And for me, the math, the numbers, and the sound like really integrates super well. But like I said, Sabat and Schweinitz as well have been really important, and there's a number of other composers that have been really important to me. But there's a lot. I don't want to like say there's one correct way to do just intonation. I think for me, the connections between just intonation is one way of making a connection between math and the sort of geometry of numbers and music. And one thing I think it adds, to get slightly technical, is rather than because my, kids are learning basic music theory now. And you think about fourths and fifths, like, for example, it's basically additive, like a fourth plus a fifth equals an octave. Okay, so the equivalent in Justin's Nation is like a 4-3 times a 3-2 equals a 2-1.
Right.
So that's a multiplicative relationship. But in Justin's Nation, because we're actually looking at the frequencies, in other words, or the harmonic numbers, you can think about additive and subtractive relationships like difference tones. It's a lot easier in the Justin's Nation world to think about those acoustic phenomena,
right,
rather than in the pitch space, which is logarithmic to that, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally. Who's putting out the Katherine Lam album?
Kairos. It's
cool.
going to be a 2 CD set.
Nice.
Yeah.
Because I think I have a bunch of her. Well, I have a few CDs of hers on Another Timbre, and I think there's one on New World too, right? And then like a couple LPs too. But that's exciting. Yeah.
And another influence I'll just mention, even it's not really necessarily Justin's Nation, but Elian Rodrigue,
of course,
is always like amazing and just like blows my mind every time
yeah, she's the best. I mean, she's
I just wish
deep music. You should get her to write a piece for you guys, because she's doing instrumental work now. So
I got to work. Charles Curtis, that was a cellist at he is a cellist in San Diego that I worked with, and he premiered some of her stuff and got me into her initially.
I guess there's she's been doing this Occam Ocean series, which maybe there's a version for string quartet. I don't know. She's written a lot of them. I think they seem to be like modular, that you can kind of mix and match instruments or put together different variations of it. But that'd be cool.
That would be cool. Yeah, I need to make more of an effort to make that happen. I think it would involve working with her in Paris for a good chunk of time, but we can hopefully make that happen.
Yeah, that's great. So as far as your music goes, what are you composing next, and do you have other recordings of your compositions coming along or anything?
I tend to be pretty slow, but I have been trying to just gather the music that I have, the recordings that I already have, and sort of just put them up on either Bandcamp or SoundCloud or my website, which it's pretty disorganized right now, but I do want to, I don't know what the next official release will be. But I've been thinking, I'm always working on ideas. I'm working on some kind of hopefully interactive system to be able to hear certain basically sonify certain mathematical patterns, and sort of like weakly forced oscillators or coupled oscillators, so that to see when they synchronize. I started reading this, or I read a really interesting book called Sync by Stephen Strogatz that got me onto a little bit, learn more about the nonlinear dynamics, which tell you kind of what happens when you set a system in motion, and thinking about oscillators and synchronizing things. There's an interesting connection, I think, with that it can apply to pitch or a rhythm. So it can be you could listen to these systems as rhythms, or you can speed it up and listen to them as pitches. And then I would love to have also a graphical interface, so you can see for these parameters, if you move your mouse over here, you'll be able to hear how it evolves, and it will it settles into, you can set up systems that settle into the ratios, and how likely they're settled, or the way they settle into them has to do with how complex the ratios are, and so on.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. It sounds like a good project. Do you do programming yourself as well, or how do you execute your kind of stuff?
Yeah, I'm doing it myself, but I use either Mathematica or like Super Collider. I'm
Yeah.
still not a very good programmer. I just kind of like it forces me to try to understand the material better, just to kind of play around with it
Right.
and either visually or yeah, listening to audiating the data.
Well, that's great. I think we'll stop there, but it was great chatting with
Cool.
you, and I'm excited to send the new LP out to subscribers. I think it's landing soon. So
Yeah,
yeah,
awesome.
and thanks for chatting with us today.
Oh, thanks so much for picking the album and great conversation.
Yeah, we'll talk to you soon. Thanks.
Okay,
Bye
take care. Bye.
bye.